morning and welcome to our Sunday morning Bible class. We have great classes. We have Emily Means and her mother Carrie Wright, who teaches our young folks. And then we have Jared, who is dealing with the book of Hebrews, the very root of our Christianity. And they're great classes, and I encourage you as parents to sit down with your children and set the example and watch with them. Don't just send them off. Go sit down, and then after the class is over, sit there and have some sort of a study or question and answers and get that dialogue going. And then this class that I am teaching is on Jesus Christ. We're dealing with the 7 miracles that are found in the book of John. And this morning, we're going to be dealing from John chapter 5. In John chapter 5, we see that the Lord makes one man's impossible situation possible. It is the man who is healed at the pool of Bethesda. He had been there for some 38 years. The Bible doesn't tell us how old he was. It does not tell us how he lost the use of his legs, whether it was through birth, whether it's through some sort of an accident. We just don't know. But what I want to do today is I want to look at a self-fulfilling prophecies. The question is asked, and we might even say, Lord, what sort of question is that? But in chapter 5, we find a statement made concerning a question. In verse 6, when Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there a long time, he said to him, now I want you to listen to the question and ask yourself, what sort of question is that, Lord? Is it insensitive? Or is it just one of those get in your face? One of those silly slaps? But listen to what Jesus said. He had come here every day, 38 years, waiting for the troubling of the water. But he said to him, do you want to be healed? Now, I want you to remember that statement through our lesson this morning, when Jesus said, do you want to be healed? In November 2004, the very elite medical researchers got together. They got together behind closed doors at Rockefeller University in New York City. And they had a goal. Their goal from these elite, magnificent thinkers was to try and figure out how they could solve the world's problems, how they could solve the medical care crisis. It was encouraging, but it was also discouraging. And here's what they studied and the conclusions that they came up with. They came up with the idea that only we can solve our own problems. They could not. Even the medical world could not solve our problems. And here is what the conclusion that they came to. We can solve our own problems, but unfortunately, we do not want to. Here's what they said. They looked at and they identified 5 behavioral issues. If we could change these, 80% of our health problems could be solved. And so 80% of our health problems were caused by 5 behavioral conditions. Conditions we can change, conditions we can choose not to change. What do you think those 5 conditions are? First one was too much eating. You figure that one out? Probably one of the number one reason that people die. Cardio. The second, if the first one is eating, what do you think that the second one is? Drinking. The third one, if you had to guess what the third behavioral issue was, it is smoking. The fourth, and this is something we talk about, but we don't do anything about, it is stress. And then the fifth that goes along with that is that we don't get enough exercise. So it is that simple, and yet it is that difficult. And with a few minor changes, we could save the major problems that's destroying us. We could solve our problems if we would change those 5 behavioral issues. But we don't want to. We want it on a wish, we want it on a whim. How many times have you gone to bed at night and dreamed of yourself taking the new medical pill? And when you wake up in the morning, you look like you're 18 years of age. We know what we need to do, but we just don't desire to do it. We don't want to do it. And so there's got to be a sanctified desire. When we talk about want, it's not just a whim. When Jesus said to the man at the pool, "Do you want to be healed? Do you want to get well?" You think it was conditional, non-conditional? The want. It is the sanctified desire and the matching discipline. Not only the desire, but there's got to be the discipline there to want to do what must be done. Do we want to? Yeah, we want to. But our want seems to fall more in the idea of a whim. And so 9 out of 10 of us we fall into that whim. We desire, we have that whim, we have what we think is a want, but 9 out of 10 people do not change. Dr. Edward Miller, who was the 13th Dean of Johns Hopkins University, the School of Medicine, he said more than 1.5 million Americans go under the coronary bypass every year. And so 1.5 million go through coronary bypass. It is a temporary fix. And so here's what he said. He said, if you look at all the people that have gone through a coronary artery procedure, the bypass, a graft, he said 2 years later, of all the 1.5 million that go through bypass surgery, if you wait 2 years, he says that 90% of the people have not changed their lifestyle. And he said, if you will change the way that you eat, if you will change the way that you exercise, he says 9 out of 10 people could save their life. But they just do not change the way they eat, nor the way they exercise. And so here's Jesus. Jesus is just in your face. He's point blank. And he asks the question. This is not being insensitive. He's asking a legitimate question. Do you want? Do you desire? Do you have the discipline to be made whole, to get well? And so Jesus is just in your face. We find that in the Gospels there are 183 or so questions that are asked in one form or another. And also it depends on what translation you use. I was going through the 183 questions that I find in the English Standard Version. And it comes down to a question. Do you really want to get well? John 5 and in verse 6. It seemed like that on one level the question may sound unkind. But Jesus is the one who is asking, do you want to get well? Now here's what I have learned in my time, not only as a human being and as a minister. Here's some things that I have learned. Number one, that you cannot help someone who does not want help. Let me repeat that. You cannot help somebody who does not want help, no matter how badly they need it. Let me give you an illustration. You have the 2 thieves on the cross. Towards the end of the account there, 2 of them were cursing Jesus. One of them, for one reason, and I think it is his observation of the Lord, it changed him. But the other one, the other thief on the cross, let's just say he is 6 feet from the Savior. And Jesus could not help him, no matter how badly he wanted it. Luke 23 and in verse 39. Through the years, I have helped people. I've done my very best to not only help them, physically help them, spiritually, emotionally help them. And I'm mindful of one group down in Hernando, Florida. When I was preaching at Inverness, Florida, I would go out and there was a man out under one of the little canopies, and he was reading his Bible, and it caught my attention, so I just stopped. I stopped the car and went over and talked with him and asked him to share his faith with me. And as we talked, I came to understand that he was part of a tent city that lived off the bicycle track in the trees. And so I asked what I could do for him. And he told me some things that they really needed. But what I eventually learned with him and with several others of the group, that they really didn't want help. You cannot help someone who does not help themselves. They would rather live off welfare. They would rather live off handouts. They'd rather live on that welfare system than they would to get well. And I have seen them. I have seen them where they have changed a lifestyle, and one of them, we found him a job and he ended up buying a home. But what seems to happen far too often, when Jesus says, do you want to get well? We have been on our 2x4 mat for so long, 8 square feet, that it has become our crutch, and we don't want to get off of it. And so we stay on it. And the more people kick the crutches out, the more desperate, the more fear that invades our life. And so Jesus said to him, do you really want to be healed? Do you want to be well? And so what happens was, as this man seemingly every day would go down to the waters, waiting for it to be troubled so he could be in the water. Selfish people there. No one would help him get into the water. We don't even know if he had a friend. And so day after day, as this invalid came to the pool, he had his security blanket, his mat. And sometimes what happened is, you've got to realize that if you want to be healed, if you want to be well, you've absolutely cannot keep doing the same thing, going to the same place, and hanging with the same people. You've got to get rid of the security mat, that security blanket. And then Jesus asked the question, do you really want to get well? And so when this man is faced with that question, what he's got to realize is, if God makes him well, he's going to have to get a job. He is going to have to do things that he has never done before. And he's going to have to throw away that security blanket, his little mat. And like every blessing of God, it comes with the burden of responsibility. You have to be a steward of it. When I think of that, I think of the movie, and I know that you've probably seen it, of Schindler's List, where most of them were career prisoners. They'd been in there all their life. And you remember the elderly gentleman. He was released. And he got a bus ticket and a little bit of money, and he was sent to the grocery store. He went and he got a job at the grocery store, and he was bagging. And people would constantly criticize him because he couldn't keep up. He just wasn't able. It was a world he didn't know. Until finally one day he went up into his apartment. He had the chair laid out, and he tied a rope over the beam. He took out his pocket knife, and he was going to inscribe his name, his initial, and a date. And he had noticed that there were several other names on that wooden beam. And then he just simply hung himself. You cannot keep doing the same thing, the same way, hang around the same people, and get well. There has to be a change. And Jesus asks this man, are you going to be a steward? Are you going to change some things? Because so many have gone before you. And so here's what we find. This is not an unkind question. It is not an uncaring question. It is not a discompassionate question. It's a question that Jesus asked him. Are you ready? And Jesus literally silly slaps him, gets right in his face. He said, I can heal your soul. I can heal you, and I can make you better. There's been times when I have worked with others in ministry, and not only have I been silly slapped by some of my mentors, I've had to do the same thing. But here's what we find. When you surround yourself with people that simply want to suck up, people that want to kiss, and people that do not want to tell you not what you want to hear, but what you need to hear. And this is what Jesus is doing with this invalid. In the book of Proverbs, chapter 27 and verse 6, faithful are the wounds of a friend. Profuse are the kisses of an enemy. And so, if you have one who simply wants to kiss up, what happens is when they turn their back and they're away from you, behind their back, you simply become a fool. And so Jesus gets in his face. He asks a pointed question. Do you want to be made well? It may not be always what we want to hear, but it's what we need to hear. And so here we find that if you and I want God to do the supernatural, the great workings of God in our life, if we want him to do the supernatural, he's asking us to do the natural. Now, this man is not given a name. He's simply an invalid. And this is just a grammatical mechanism that draws attention. But what he is asking is, are you willing to do what you can do so I can do what I can do? You remember Naaman. Naaman was told, you need to go and you need to dip in the Jordan River, and you need to do it 7 times. The woman who had the issue of blood, man, she had to fight through the crowd to get close enough to Jesus so that she could touch his garment. She had to do something. And then we have the disciples. The disciples had to haul their net into the boat, on the other side of the boat. And here's what we find. Some of the great workings of God take place with tough love. Some of the great workings of God take place in our life, but it takes time. If God is going to work in our life in such a magnificent way, it may take us putting forth more effort. And if God is going to work miraculously, do those great things in our life, it may require from me some blood, some sweat, and some tears. Now let's go back and let's ask the question, do you want to be healed? Now here's a man who had not walked in 38 years. And so what you have there is you have atrophy, where those muscles have just wasted away. If you've ever been in a cast, or if you've ever had surgery on your leg, it takes so long to work that muscle and those ligaments to get the strength. But with that atrophy, it takes such a short time to lose that strength. So building muscle takes time. Losing it takes so little time. And so here was a man, and stop and think about it. Have you ever had a doctor say you're going to have to lay up in bed? Maybe you've been to a hospital. One of the hardest things is the therapy, where you've got to get back to doing, walking. Here was a man. You stop and think. He had not walked. The muscles in his legs had not worked in 38 years. This man was nothing but skin and bone. Not only did he not have muscle, he did not have muscle memory. Man, we look at how a bird flies through the air, or a fish swimming through water. We think that's great. We don't swim through water and we don't fly in the air, but it is a miracle that you and I can just stand up straight. Between the muscles and the ear, there's mechanisms there that are programmed by the eyes, if you will. And when we see ourselves moving, we correct it. We have muscle memory. We do it all the time, and we do it subconsciously. And here was a man who did not have muscle. He did not have muscle memory. And yet God tells him to get up and walk. Do you want to experience the great things of God? Then do what you have not done. This man, and we have Jesus who walked on water. Miraculous. You imagine being told, you need to stand up, walk, throw your mat away. Don't keep that little security blanket. Do what you've never done. It was just as miraculous for this man to get up and walk as it was for Jesus to walk on water. And so here's what happens. When routine, for 38 years, this man had a routine. He would come, he would sit on his mat, he would wait for the troubling of the water, and there was no one to put him in there. Now, if you're an exerciser, a lot of people work out at the gym, but if you're routine, what happens is the muscles adapt to routine very quickly. And so you have to do something different to exercise those muscles, to condition them. When our routine becomes the routine, we need to change the routine. Sometimes we simply go through the action. Jesus said, get rid of your security mat, get rid of the routine if you want to be made well. Here we have, in the lesson of the man who had not walked in 38 years, the man at Bethesda, at the pool. I don't know, maybe he just told himself he's never going to walk again. But we've got to be able to tell ourselves, not that the world can define us. This man, I wonder if he introduced himself, I'm so-and-so, I'm the invalid, I'm the one the Bible does not give a name. When you introduce yourself, do you say, I'm Mike and I'm hard of hearing? I'm Mike and I have difficulty seeing. Or I'm Mike and I have diabetes. The world very unhumanly and unholy have divined or decided that people are defined by a title. Don't let that happen. Don't let the world tell you who you are. Take your cues from the Bible. In the book of Romans chapter 8 and in verse 37, Paul says that we are more than conquerors. In the book of Zechariah 2 and in verse 8, we are called the apple of God's eye. Here's the Bible defining us. In the book of Romans 8 and in verse 17, we are joint heirs with Jesus Christ himself. And in Romans 1 and in verse 12, we are the children of God. So here's what you ask, and look at the changes that are made in people's lives. Do not let the words of other people be the prophecy of your life. Allow God to define who you are. You are not an invalid. You are a child of God. And we can do all things that are right and proper and within the law of our Lord because he strengthens us. We thank you for joining us, and we hope that this lesson, we pray that this lesson has helped you in your life. Speak the words that God speaks about you, and let those words be the words of self-fulfilling prophecy. May God bless you and have a great week. I know it's supposed to be -5 degrees and snowing here on Monday, Sunday night and Monday. Stay in, cover up, and make sure you've got some milk and some hot chocolate. Thank you for joining us.